Strategy battle gamers around the world, what an exciting day it has been to be a strategy battle gamer, with of course news about the dates for ArdaCon 2017 being the 4th, 5th and 6th, as well as all the discounts that are going to be involved with that, particularly the hotels. However, this video brought to you by moi is actually going to be about some other news, because next year we of course also have the Warhammer World Lord of the Rings Hobbit Strategy Battle Gaming Grand Tournament to look forward to, coming back after a few years out of action, and information and the rules pack about that has also gone up. So today isn't just about ArdaCon, it's also about the GT at Warhammer World, and with that information has come some very exciting news and information specifically regarding new competitive play scenarios. Now I know lots of people were expecting or thinking that there was going to be a little bit of an update on the competitive play scenarios that we received. These were the 6 scenarios from the Hobbit rulebook. So To the Death, Domination, High Ground, Hold Ground, Lords of Battle, and of course Reconnoiter as well, if I didn't mention that one. And we did expect that maybe we would see something like that in there and back again, but we did not. We did not. However, along with the rules pack for the Grand Tournament at Warhammer World next year, which is in February, have come along an update to the standard scenarios. Now that doesn't mean that you can't use the scenarios from the Unexpected Journey, but it does mean that there is something new coming officially from an official source, rather than independent events and TOs like myself creating adjustments and custom scenarios as we always do. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do that either, but it's nice to see some new tweaks to scenarios. And they are mainly tweaks, and in this video I'm going to be going through what those tweaks are. And that starts off with Domination. So Domination looks like it sets up exactly the same as in the Hobbit rulebook, but there are a couple of changes, and the key change that I can see here, well, there are 2 changes, is with the setup. So usually we have that whole scenario at the start of some of the scenarios where you roll a dice to see if you deploy in the first 12 inches or anywhere on your half of the board. That appears to be a big change across all the scenarios, that is gone. That is gone, which will in turn make certain models that we haven't seen as much of during the Hobbit era, so you know, specifically siege engines and the like, and some of the new stuff like the Azog signal tower and all that kind of thing, be a little bit more viable. Now you don't need to roll a dice, or you do to see which board half that you choose, but you can deploy anywhere on your half of the board. So that is a big change. Straight away it tells me that it gives a bit of an advantage to some of the more shooty armies, which has suffered a little bit to a degree during the Hobbit era with move shoot penalties and the like, and particularly the deployment ones. But I think that the biggest reason that we've seen this change is definitely to see more of an inclusion of some of the siege weapons that we haven't really seen. So things like the Iron Hills Ballista, and the Troll catapults and all that kind of stuff, to make it a little bit more viable for them to kind of deploy right at the back of the board and not risk such an expensive model being so close to the middle where it can get pounced on incredibly quickly. So that is the first big change, but the next big change to Domination comes from the actual victory points with the objectives. So previously you would score 3 victory points for each objective marker that has at least one of your models and no enemy models within 3 inches. This is now down to 2 victory points. They've reduced that, and you're going to see why as I review each of these scenarios. You get 1 victory point for each objective marker that has both friendly and enemy models, but more friendly models within 3 inches. So that stayed exactly the same, and also the leader points have stayed exactly the same, and also and then something else has changed. Previously you score 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game. If your force is still unbroken, you instead score 3 victory points. In this version of Domination you do not score 3 victory points if you are unbroken, and what that means is that your total capacity of victory points that you can get over the course of the game, and this is important to keep an eye on is if you've got 5, then you can obviously get 10, and then you can also get 1 victory point for causing a wound on the enemy leader, and 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken. So in total you can get 12. I don't think I pointed it out there. You've also lost the 3 victory points for killing the enemy leader. So you just get a point for wounding and a point for breaking, but none of the 3-point rewards. And that means that you've got a 12-point victory point limit. So the big change to domination there, deployment, you can deploy anywhere on your half of the board after you've decided who's playing which half, and there's some very, very important and significant tweaks to how those victory points are awarded. So let's move on to the death. What are the changes with to the death? Well, let's have a little look. Has deployment changed? Yes, it has. On this one, it forces you to deploy right towards the back of the board. Now, instead of rolling a dice to see whether you're in the first 12 inches or anywhere on your half, now you deploy, once you've picked your board halves, you deploy within 12 inches of your board edge. Okay, so at least 24 inches away from your opponent's battle line. And again, that is going to make some of the siege weapons and shooting based armies a little bit more viable again. So, you know, in some ways a big buff to the elves. Some people are saying, oh, I don't think the elves have had as much love perhaps as things like, well, I know Lake Town had a lot of love, but things like Lake Town and Iron Hills Dwarves, but something as subtle as this makes a big difference. But probably more importantly, it's going to make things like Azog's Signal Tower, Iron Hills Ballista, Troll Catapults and other siege engines from across the range that little bit more viable. So again, big change there, 12 inches from your own board half for deployment. And have victory points changed here? So it's still 1 and 3. It's still 1 and 3 for leader. So 1 victory point for causing 1 wounds on the enemy leader and 3 victory points for killing them. It's still 3 and 5 for breaking and then breaking without being broken yourself. That's exactly the same. And then we also have banner points, which is the same. 1 victory point if you have at least 1 banner remaining at the end of the game. If you have at least 1 banner remaining, your opponent has none, you get 2, which takes you up to a potential of 10. But then there is an additional reward, and one which I'm a big fan of, one that I've done when I've done custom scenarios or tweaked scenarios before. You score 2 victory points if the enemy force is reduced to 25% of its starting models at the end of the game, which is brilliant. And again, that brings it to 12. That brings it to 12 VPs maximum you can get if you kill the enemy leader, if you break them without being broken yourself, if you've got a banner and they've not got a banner, and you reduce the enemy force 25%, it's 12, so matching domination. So you can see here it's been tweaked with that kind of competitive play in mind, so you don't end up in situations where the game is perhaps unbalanced depending on whether there's like reconnoiter at a tournament and where that reconnoiter game is or where Lords of Battle are. And having that at a glance, this is going to be one of the changes that we're going to see recurring throughout. So next up, let's take a little bit of a look at Holdground and see if we've seen any changes in the competitive play scenario for that. And I believe that it is pretty much, let me just check things like end game conditions here, are the same, yep, and domination, yep, is the same. Okay, so Holdground, game still ends on a 1 or a 2 and the like, but it is mainly the victory points here at a glance which have changed, mainly the victory points. I think the Holdground is pretty much the same at a glance, but let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong. But the things that have changed are those victory points, okay? So instead of, before you'd score 1 victory point for each of your models within 6 inches of the objective marker, and that was the kind of measure for seeing what your victory points were. Now you score 3 victory points if you have more models within 6 inches of the objective than your opponent. If you have twice as many models within 6 inches of the objective than your opponent, you instead score 5 victory points. If you have 3 times as many models within 6 inches of the objective than your opponent, or are the only player to have models within 6 inches of the objective, you instead score 7 victory points. So there we go, we've got a 3, a 5 and a 7, and again this is something which I have seen before, but it's good to see coming from an official source for new scenarios and competitive play scenarios to play going forwards, which is good. So that is very different. Now, and there has been another change as well. So before you'd score 1 victory point for wounding the enemy leader, but 3 if you kill them. Now you get 1 for causing 1 or more wounds on the enemy leader, but 2 victory points if you kill the enemy leader. So there is a reduction in the number of VPs available for that. And then breaking is exactly the same. 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game, and 3 if not. So again, we've got a situation here where it looks like 12 VPs is the maximum. You can get 7 if you've got more than 3 times the number of models on the centre objective, or your opponent hasn't got any at all and you have. You get 7 for that, 2 for killing the enemy leader, and 3 for breaking them. Again, it's a total of 12. So we can see what they're doing here. This is the big change, as it were. Now, for far as I can see, moving on to the battlefield, Maelstrom of Battle is exactly the same. I'll just have a quick glance through this. 2, opponent chooses north, south. Yep, I believe it's the same. And models can't charge, which was the same, but otherwise normally. Yep, so it's exactly the same in every other way as before. You know, it's you move on and there's an initial priority rather than it being a form of deployment, so that hasn't changed. But what has massively changed for Holdground is the VPs and where you get those VPs from. So huge changes there. So I'm expecting to see something similar here, and there certainly is for Lords of Battle. Now there are some big changes in Lords of Battle, some of which where I'm going to openly question on here whether that is, you know, it's true, it is as it's meant to be. So again, deployment, it's not 1 to 3 or 4 to 6 anywhere, 1 to 3 first 12 inches. You can deploy anywhere in your half of the board once you've selected your board edges. So that is a big change in terms of deployment, which is good. And also something which is worth pointing out here is that in all the scenarios it is taken into account that 4x4 is the preferred table size, whereas in the original book 6x4 is the kind of assumed table size, whereas all of these have been written for 4x4 by the looks of it, which is cool. So yep, deployment anywhere in your own half, that's changed. Let's have a little bit of a look at the objectives, because this has changed. So before, every time an enemy model suffered a wound or expends a fate point, you score 1 victory point. A model that fails a fate roll will therefore award 2 victory points, etc, etc, etc. We know all of that. And there was 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken, and if you were unbroken you get 3 instead. Okay, so let's have a little look at this. So it still ends on the result of a 1 or a 2 after 1 force has been broken. So that's exactly the same. But here we go. For this scenario you need to keep track of your wound tally, so just like you would do in previous Lords of Battle. Your wound tally is equal to the number of wounds that your army inflicted upon your opponent's army, plus any fate points that your opponent spent. Heroes that are removed from the game with unspent fate point will add 1 to the wound tally for each one unspent. That's exactly the same. Models that flee because their force is broken count towards the wound tally. That is exactly the same. However, this is different. However, mounts that flee do not. So no longer do, you know, if you kill a cavalry model and the horse flees from the battlefield because you killed the rider, no longer do you get 2 VPs. This is huge. Get Buff Bat Reps over on the GBHL podcast will be returning. If that's how I read it, because that's how it looks. Okay? So mounts that flee do not count towards VPs. That is big. That is big. Okay? So here we go. You score 3 victory points if your wound tally is greater than your opponent's. Okay, so change there straight away. You're not getting 1 VP for every single one. If your wound tally is at least twice as large as your opponent's, then you instead score 5. So you're seeing something very similar here to the Holdground, which is good because it's tying everything together. If your wound tally is at least twice as large as your opponent's, then you instead score 5 victory points. If your wound tally is at least 3 times as large as your opponent's, or your opponent has no models left on the board, so if you table your opponent, you instead score 7 victory points. So you can see that scaling then, 3, 5 and 7. Big changes, and again it means that you're not going to end up in a situation where, you know, you're at a tournament and, I don't know, you brought a Hobbit army, you go up against an army that's got monsters in it, and all of a sudden, you know, you're massively penalised because, you know, they get like 70 odd VPs versus you in this one scenario, and that affects your whole tournament. All of your good work and everything else is undone, so that has been fixed. Okay, now in terms of leader, that has also changed. You can see that leader VPs aren't necessarily as valuable across all of the scenarios, which is good. It means you can be a little bit bolder with your leaders, get them to do the things that you want them to do, and look at with the main primary objectives being primary objectives rather than just relying on leader kill and breaking all the time. So before, you didn't get any leader wounds on this one, but now you get 1 VP for causing 1 or more wounds on the enemy leader. Wounds prevented by successful fate roll do not count, so bear that in mind. If you kill the enemy leader, you score 2 victory points. So leader kill has been included in this where it isn't on normal Lords of Battle. However, you score 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game, and 3 if you are unbroken, which is the same, which again means that in total you've got a maximum VP count there of 12, so it's consistent with the other scenarios. Now the special rule name is different. Previously, Contest of Champions, each time your force kills an enemy hero in a fight, one of your heroes in the same fight, your choice, regains a single might point lost earlier in the battle. So how has that changed? It's now called a Time of Heroes. Each time your force kills an enemy hero in a fight, one of your heroes in the same fight, your choice, regains a point of might lost earlier in the battle. It's exactly the same, unless I've missed something, but with a different name. And there you go, that's Lords of Battle. So some really good fixes there. Okay, so how does Reconnoiter change? Well, Reconnoiter setup is exactly the same. You know, you walk on, you don't deploy on the board. And all of that side of it is exactly the same as before. Okay. But victory points, of course, are different, and I can probably guess at this point that it's going to tie in with this whole 12 VP max thing, and this 3, 5, 7 for primary objective kind of point of view. Okay, so you score 3 victory points if more of your models have escaped the battlefield than your opponent. If at least 2 of your models and twice as many models than your opponent have escaped the board, then you instead score 5 victory points. If at least 3 of your models and 3 times as many models than your opponent have escaped the board, then you instead score 7 victory points. So there you go. So instead of, oh, I've got a horde army, I've got a goblin horde, I just get everything off and I get hundreds of VPs. Now it's 3, 5 and 7. Okay, and they've also tweaked leader points here. Instead of being 1 and 3, it's 1 and 2, so 1 for causing a wound but 2 for killing, and breaking is 1 and 3. So you can see that breaking an opponent in a lot of these scenarios has got a little bit more value than killing the leader, and that's because it's harder to do. You know, sniping out a hero is an easier task than having to break an enemy, and it's nice to see that reflected in the scenarios. Okay. Now, as well as the objectives and the VPs changing, let's have a little bit of a change here. So on the reinforcements rule, warbands that have still not arrived by the start of the 4th turn will automatically arrive on turn 4, and then everything else is the same. So 1 to 3, the warband doesn't yet arrive but receives a +1 to this dice roll next turn. And a 4 to 6, the warband arrives from the controlling player's board edge via the rules for reinforcements. So there we go. So no matter what happens, no matter how bad your luck is, all of your models will be on the board by the 4th turn. Now I know a lot of people, when they were discussing the evil heroes and evil troops, specifically the mercenary goblins, we're a little bit worried about how mercenary goblins been able to sort of pop up in a piece of terrain, how that would affect the game, but that has been clarified in this. So special rules that allow for models to arrive on from any table edge, such as the goblin mercenary captain's mercenary ambush, must choose the controlling player's table edge for this scenario. Now I wonder if that will be the same for things like Grima and the like, I don't know. But yeah, that's quite interesting. straight away they thought, hang on a minute, we don't want a situation where, you know, there's a piece of eligible terrain right there at the front, and, you know, the enemy have to stay back just in case those mercenary goblins just pop up and walk off the board and give themselves an auto win. So it's nice to see that that has been looked at, and again, a maximum of 12 VPs there. So one last scenario: high ground has gone. High ground has gone. No more high ground on this. That doesn't mean you can't play high ground in this book, in the Hobbit rulebook, but high ground has gone in terms of what they're putting up for the grand tournament, and I suspect what they might be looking to build on for any future rulebook as well, perhaps, we don't know. So the remaining scenario for the GT is called Heirlooms of Ages Past. Okay, so I'm going to go through this a little bit. A precious relic lies upon the battlefield. He who holds it will win the day. So you choose your force. Yep. Layout is 4x4. It's exactly the same. Okay, there's a bit of a typo on there after the rules manual. I think it's been copied and pasted, and Azog Legion 700 is popping up next. But you place 6 objective markers on the battlefield. You roll a dice. Player with the highest score places 1. Anywhere on the battlefield at least 6 inches away from board edge. Then the opponent does one at least 12 inches away, and you do that until you've done 6. This is already sounding very much like the Scouring, which I believe the Scouring is a scenario that we see quite a lot up at the Scouring, the Scouring of Stirlingshire. So yeah, I mean, it looks immediately like that's it's that kind of scenario. So here we go, the objectives. Once one force has been broken, the game might suddenly end, so it's a game which will end on a 1 or a 2 after the turn in which you're broken. Victory points are awarded for the following. You score 6 victory points if your force is in possession of the relic at the end of the game. So I'm guessing the relic is something which has to be discovered between these objectives. Again, like the Scouring. If at the end of the game you're not in possession of the relic but have more models within 3 inches of the relic than your opponent, then you instead score 3. We've got a 1 and 2 victory point condition for leader. Again, 1 for wounding, 2 for killing. We've also got a 1 and a 2 victory point condition for breaking. So 1 for breaking, 2 for also being unbroken. And we've also got banner objectives in there. 1 victory point if you have at least 1 banner remaining at the end of the game. If you have at least 1 banner remaining and your opponent has none remaining, then you get 2. There we go. So again, that makes up for a potential total of 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So it's consistent across the board. Each scenario equally gives you victory points back, which is cool. Special rules. So uncovering the relics. This is how you actually find a relic from those 6 objectives. Only one of the objectives is actually the relic that both sides seek. First time each turn an unengaged model on foot ends its movement in base contact with an objective, they may search it in an attempt to uncover the relic, just like the Scouring. When this happens, roll a dice. On the score of a 6, the relic has been discovered, and a model that discovered it takes possession of it. Might cannot be used to influence the roll. If the roll is a 1 to 5, then the relic is not there. Remove an object from play. The first 5 objectives to be searched do not reveal the relic. The last one will automatically be the relic. There is no need to roll for it. So this is pretty much exactly the same as the Scouring scenario in that sense. And what you tend to see with that scenario is that a smart player will not try and dig up their objective, or they'll always keep one objective uncovered. So they'll go round and they'll try and just dig up the others, and they'll make sure that they keep one uncovered and try and get the other ones discovered, or at the last point of the game try and see which one it's going to be. Because of course rolling a 6, you've got 1 in 6 chance. Of course you could get lucky and do it, but it's almost more likely that that you'll win the game by the other ones being sort of picked up and discovered. So it's not a bad shout, sort of going around and just trying to dig them up. Now, it's a relic of power. So interesting what that suggests. The relic is treated as a light object. However, dark powers lie upon it that may yet seep into the mind of its holder. Unwilling to give it up, models carrying a relic may not drop it or pass it to another model. So you can't have a situation, which we have seen in the past, where, I don't know, like in Seize the Prize, someone goes up with, you know, I don't know, a Son of Ale. Son of Ale runs up there first turn, dismounts, digs up the prize. You know, one of your heroes is in base contact with that model, it gets passed on and he runs off, or passing things to fell beasts or anything like that. You know, I don't know, Shelob runs up, digs it up out of the ground, passes it to a fell beast flies off the board, that kind of thing. Once they've dug it up, they have to keep it. Additionally, at the start of the turn, before priority is rolled, roll a dice. On the roll of a 1, the model is transfixed as described in the main rules manual. So that's a nice little touch. So, you know, this relic has got some real powers to it. And I think that's quite cool. It does bring in a degree of randomness. You could see a frustrating situation in some games where your game isn't going great because you've rolled too many ones for that roll. But, you know, it's a good bit of fun, isn't it? Which is cool. And interestingly for this one, deployment is Maelstrom of Battle, so it's exactly the same as Holdground in that sense. So it's like a Holdground deployment. Maelstrom of Battle is exactly the same. You don't start the game on the board, so that's going to make it interesting in terms of where you deploy those 6 objectives if you're alternating them, because once they're deployed, it's, you know, you might not come on where you want to come on because of Maelstrom, which is really interesting. So quite an interesting different one. I'm looking forward to playing that one. Maybe on the next Adventures in Arda, I will play Heirlooms of Ages Past as a priority to show that off. All in all, what's my review? Well, all of the things that I think are really, really good are I like the fact that certain things are made more viable by the very, very subtle change to deployment, so no longer are you forced to, or in some situations forced to deploy really close up, which makes certain things which are in the game slightly more viable again, that you're paying a lot of points for, like your siege engines and the like. And also, if you can deploy in any part of your part of the battlefield, it means that you can have a real kind of plan and a strategy and battle tactic which isn't going to be messed up by a roll early on in the game, and it makes shooting a little bit more effective as well. Which is cool. It takes away a bit of that randomness, and I love the fact that all of these scenarios are capped at 12, and that a little bit of importance is taken off leader kill and the like for a lot of them. So all in all, I'm a big fan of these scenarios, tweaks and changes. I would not be surprised if we see these being used at Desolation of Stockport in April, which I'm really looking forward to running with Jamie Giblin. I know that we were waiting to see if there were going to be new scenarios, official scenarios, and when we saw that there weren't them in there and back again, we actually did a lot of the changes which are in here, which is to cap VPs, except we capped them at 21. Whereas this, now there is a set structure, PDFs out there available, so we will just go probably for that, and I imagine this is what we would use for Ardacon as well, plus one other custom scenario which would have to be thought of in a similar kind of vein, I suppose. So there we go. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a rundown of what the scenarios for the Warhammer World Grand Tournament Hobbit SBG is going to be in February. I hope to see loads of you there. I know that they've usually got a limit of about 100 spaces at Warhammer World, so I'm pretty sure that they'll get snapped up quick. I hope I can make it. I might not be able to. More details about that you can find over on the Warhammer World website, and it is a 600 point event, and you must bring good and evil. So yeah, £65 for the ticket, and you get some lunch included on both days as well, which is pretty good. So I'm looking forward to playing these scenarios. Hope you enjoyed the little rundown of it. Remember to support all my content here on Hotgates Gaming and over on the GBXL podcast. Do check out the Patreon, even if you're just chucking in $1 per video, or putting a limit on it that you only want to pop in $1 per month. That's absolutely fine, and it is tied into how many videos that I do manage to produce, and you can put a limit on that. So do support me, making more content. I hope you guys out there are having a good game. I'm looking forward to my next good game with these scenarios, and we'll catch you all soon, hopefully in the next episode of Adventures in Arda.